morning's word with a short chorus, something that we know. We're not going to do much of it, but a part of it speaks to what I want to share this morning. I need you need me, we're all a part of God's body. Stand with me, agree with me, we're all a part of God's body. It is His will that every need be supplied. You are important to me, I need you to survive. There is nothing more powerful than a Christian on their knees in prayer. It highlights the reality that true spiritual power comes not from within ourselves, but from total surrender to God. Not honoring this truth leads to idolatry. When you are idolater, or when you believe in idols, you believe and trust in other people and other things other than God. Anything you lift higher than God becomes an idol. One of the greatest manifestations of this disease is seen in someone exhibiting a heightened sense of what is called perfectionism. And I call it a disease because it does damage to you. Anything that does damage to you, they call it a disease. And disease really is a mix of two words. This means against, and ease means when you travel with ease, it means you're comfortable. Anything that is a disease creates discomfort. And this thing called perfectionism, at one point in time, I used to call myself a perfectionist. Why? Because I am the type of person, and was for a long time, significantly the type of person who, if it had done properly, I'm not comfortable. I like to nitpick to make sure things done. Sometimes in nitpicking you waste an opportunity because you needed to speed up. And that was me. I am guilty of that. I had that disease. But God is working on me with respect to that. I am learning to do things, and if it's even half done, I have found out is better than perfect. Because you could talk about how much perfect you want, and the person who's doing it and going ahead will have success, and you still left fighting up to make sure you cross all the T's and dot all the I's. Perfectionism is a disease. There's nothing wrong with striving for excellence. It, however, becomes idolatrous when you believe that the final outcome is up to you. And that was me. I have so many examples in my life where the thing not working out, but I'm not leaving it because I feel that I'm in control. Up to yesterday, that happened to me. I'm trying to fix that waka. I fix that waka 3 times. I go and pay for it. I say this time I pay for it. I can handle it myself. And I start to fix it. It look like it fixing, and then the whole thing unravels on me, and I have to leave it alone. I have to find some way, and God is good. When it unravels, I've got less angry than I expected I would have been. That means God working on me. And I don't know if all you ever have been in that position. If all you never have been in that position, God bless all you. But there are times when things not working out the way I want it, and boy, I'm going on the road still fighting it. And a lot of times it fights back. And at the end of the day, I lose. You are the final arbiter. In other words, if they're finished, you're going to finish behind it. Many times I have to swallow my pride before God and submit my plans to Him. Jeremiah 29:11 says, and we know it, so I'm not going to repeat it. I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you, not to hurt you, and to give you a good end. But if your plan doesn't line up with God, you could work the plan how hard you want to be, to work it, and it doesn't come true. So, I have that I found out through my experience that I want to share with you as to how you could defeat perfectionism. There's no vaccine for it, but there are some steps that you need to take to prevent you from going down that road of being a perfectionist. I used to wear that as a banner when people ask me, well, you know, you do this and you need and you want that. And I used to be glad to tell them I'm a perfectionist. Ashamed now, because perfectionists could get you in trouble. Perfectionism and godly surrender are polar opposites. You can't be a perfectionist and then claim that you are a child who surrendered to God. Because when you surrender to God, what you do is you tell God, here what? Your will, not mine. When you are a perfectionist, when you tell yourself, it's my will, nobody else will. That means you and God can't be friends. Because your attitude and God's will never line up. Surrender at any time, in any form, is never easy. Can you picture yourself in a boxing match with somebody? Or a wrestling match, and they pin you? Your family in the front row. And you're telling yourself, boy, it would be too shameful if then people see me get pinned. So you're fighting your way out. Surrender is not an easy thing. But you're feeling your breath leaving you. You're telling yourself, it looks like I'm going to be George Floyd, boy. This man knee on my neck. I can't breathe, but my pride will kill me because I want to surrender. And I don't know about you, but sometimes that's where we are in life. We get in licks, and if we surrender, we could live to fight another day, but we don't want to give up because we don't look bad. How it will look? So surrender at any time is never easy. But with God, one can retreat with your dignity intact. There's a statement I'm trying to remember it now. He who lives, he who fights and runs away, lives to fight another day. God help us to be sensible enough to know to run. Because if we stay, we might not live another day. Breaking perfectionism involves some key steps. First one, offer your thoughts and your ideas to God. Nothing wrong with having thoughts and doing what you want, but offer them to God. Step 2, outline your plans, but build in your plans flexibility for God's will. If you decide that you're fed up living under your mother's house, God may not give you a vision to move because He gave you a brain. You want to tell yourself, well, if I want to have a wife and I want to have children, I should think in terms of building a house. Nothing wrong with that idea. What you want to do is to take the idea to God and let Him work out how best it could be done. When you submit to God, it doesn't mean that you're going to be everything God will do. But at least you've given Him the opportunity to help you in your cause. The third thing is to draw from your experience toolkit. All of us have experiences that we could draw from. Things that we did before, we could have learned from past experiences, and we could bring to bear on what we're going through now. I call that an experience toolkit, and all of us have a toolkit. My toolkit might be big in terms of agriculture. Another person's toolkit might be big in terms of managing the kitchen. Me, I good at the kitchen, I will burn water. But if you have the experience in doing a good bread and cakes and cooking and whatnot, that's your experience toolkit. Draw from it. The fourth thing is to seek God's face. In other words, when you formulate a rough plan, go to Him. He doesn't always do that, but that's the ideal thing. God, I want to build a house because I want to move out from under my mother's downstairs. How do I do this? You may get some ideas, but if you decide I'm going to start to buy material and I'm going to look for a lot and whatnot, and you start operating on your own, don't be surprised if when you go to God, you don't hear any man say because you didn't talk to Him up front. The fifth thing is to leave it in God's hands. And here's the problem with that. That fifth step is probably the biggest step to conquer. Because Leaving it in God's hand is as good as if you say you surrender, and that's what it is. When you surrender to God and you allow Him to work, the decision to do that is always a tough decision. And sometimes you have people around you who will be forcing you and pushing you to do some stuff. The builder wants to get some money, but while you waiting for an answer from God, He ready to build. And He forcing you, when you going to start? Because I just finished a job here, you know. If you don't take me now, I'm going to start the next one. He has another job to start with, but He wants to force you to make a decision before you are ready. Recovery from any addiction or disease is a process. And as I say, I treat perfectionism as a disease. And when you're recovering from a disease, you don't have the cold today, and suddenly tomorrow you're up and you're running. You might get up tomorrow and feel a little stronger, but it takes you some time before you come back to full strength. It's a process, and it takes time and personal commitment. Leaving it in God's hand is the title of what I wanted to share with you today. I'm not going to speak much longer because I provided a preamble as to why it's necessary to leave it in God's hand. But leaving it in God's hand as a principle is easier said than done. But it's an imperative. It's something we have to do. It ain't no maybe about it. You can't get around it. If you claim to be a child of God, you don't have a choice but to allow God to interfere in your situation. If godly success and peace is the goal, then leaving it in God's hand is imperative. Let's break that statement down. Leave it. If you're going to leave something in somebody's hand, you first have to have it in your hand. So take it up. It's in your possession. It occupies space in your head. And if it's a physical thing, it occupies space in terms of real space. But most times when you go into God with something, it is more a principle and an idea. And the fact that you're going to God most times is because it is an idea that weighs heavy on your mind. In other words, you're worried and you're anxious about this. You have an outcome that you want, but you don't know how the outcome will come in. Because sometimes you want the outcome, but you don't have the resources. And so it occupies space in your head. In other words, if that was a person, that person would have been renting and not paying rent in your head. In Genesis 12 and verse 1, God told Abraham, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Abraham's obedience demonstrated not only the fact that he was willing to leave a present he was familiar with, but to trust God with a future he had no knowledge of. That is faith. He was leaving his future in God's hands. Hebrews 11 and verse 1 says, now faith is the confidence of what we hope for. Just this morning, just now we spoke of what hope is. And assurance of what we do not see. And later on, in that same chapter, chapter 11, Abraham was commended as one of the fathers of faith. It was faith that allowed Abraham to listen to God when God said, take up your jargy bundle and go. He didn't call the name of a place. He said, you take up your bundle and go. I want to show you. That's tough. Because if you tell me open system, I could kind of imagine the road. But when you tell me you're going to tell me as I go, it means I really have to trust you. Because I know where I'm going. If somebody asks Abraham along the way, where are you going? Abraham couldn't tell them. Say, I'm following God. That's tough. But that's where we ought to be as children of God. Sometimes when the road is dark, and here's how I see God works with us. God hardly ever shows us the end, you know. He shows us where to start. And it's like a car driving through the night. You could only see as far as the headlights go. And if in some instances your car is an old car, then headlights ain't showing far at all. It might be a car in good condition, but if they're not adjusted properly, the headlights just switching right in. That means you have to drive slow, you have to take your time, and you have to follow the road as it opens up because of the light. And that's what God wants of us. So leaving, we work with leaving it in God's hands. We just dealt with leaving. You leave it in God's hands. You operate on faith and you continue as He leads. Your it could be anything or anybody. Your it could be a relationship that you want dealt with and it's not working out regardless of how hard you try. Your it could be your finances, like in my case. That's my big it. I don't know what your it is, but leaving it in God's hand is what makes sense for us. Because we call ourselves Christians. We're not in the world. And so how the world fights their battles is different to how we should fight ours. It could be anything or everything. If it's big enough to be a problem to you, it's not too small for God to interfere with. Let me repeat that. Because here's what. Sometimes we feel that this thing bothering me, but we feel God. You may not tell yourself that, but that's how we think. We feel that makes them go to God. Why to tell God that me and my daughter ain't talking? Don't go tell God. If it's worrying you, go to God with it. It's big enough to be a problem for you. It ain't too small for God to want to interfere. Leave it in. If I'm leaving something in somebody's hand, and their hand like this, chances are what I'm putting in their hand will roll off, right? But if their hand like this, then that hand secures what I'm putting in their hand. And so, can you imagine, there was a time when, in a lot of instances, people had what was called a copper in their yard. The old people know what a copper is. But a copper is a big metal oval structure that used to hold water in. If you had a copper a long time, you were a wealthy man. Because the thing heavy. The smallest copper, you have to get some heavy lifting machine to lift it. I knew there was one in Chacha Trace, quite up past where Hampshire, and then you see the green, you know Hampshire. But the bottom line is, if you have to see in a copper, you have to get up and over into that copper. So can you picture that what you're leaving in God's hand is secure? Because you can't shake a copper to turn it over. You have to climb up over it to see what's down inside. Whatever inside a copper is secure. Can you picture whatever you're putting in God's hand is like placing it in a copper? So you're not putting anything on God's hand. On means it could roll off. In means that it's enclosed and secure. And then God's hand. So we just gave you an analogy of what God's hand would look like. Visualize yourself kneeling before God with your empty hands, palms up. Isn't that a position of worship? Romans 12 verse 1 says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. For purposes of this topic, leaving it in God's hand, you are called to offer to God not only your body, but your plans, and everything else that serves as a stumbling block to your true and proper worship. As you leave His presence, your back is turned. You are now refocused because you just left your burdens at His footstool. You just left your burdens in His hand. So by the time you turn away, life should feel a little bit different. The situation has not been dealt with fully. But if you leave your problems with Him, you could turn away and feel comfortable. Not that it's fully dealt with, but the fact that at least you release the burden. So there are times when you pray, and when you finish praying, you feel relieved. Not that the money comes that you're praying for, but you give God a chance and you tell yourself, well, God, if you don't do that, at least I talk to you. And I expect that you're going to do something. There's nothing that makes you excited as expectation of a good result. You know how many children were anxious Wednesday night? Some of them didn't sleep It was like the night before Christmas. And then the Ministry of Education decided that they are releasing it Wednesday night, they release it Thursday night. You know the level of anxiety, that level just went up past 100 because you have an expectation of something good. And you know many people, their expectation was rewarded because they passed for their first choice. And some people were disappointed because they didn't pass for their first choice. I had to give my granddaughter a little lecture yesterday because she didn't pass for her first choice. And I didn't see her, but I asked her mother, she's still crying because I knew she would have been crying. She was disappointed. But sometimes in your disappointment, you have to look back, like I just said. You have to look back because she did not pass for her first choice, but she passed for somebody else's first choice. If they had gotten it, they would have been happy. She passed for COVID, and that wasn't her choice. But you know, many people pass for schools that, in the scheme of things, they think it's less than, and if they had passed for COVID, then they would have been on top of the world. So I have to speak into her life and tell her, here what's going on. What do you want to be when you grow up? And she told me. I said, well, here what? It's not so much the location, it is your commitment. It is what you want bad enough. And I say, let me tell you this, and I'm saying this to you this morning. Sometimes your blessings is disguised as disappointment. So I told her some stories about me, kind of relaxing form too. I was in the brightest form too because they screen people. I was in the brightest form too. Played the fool and carried on. And when I finished exam in form 2, in promoting me, they promoted me to the form 3. That was the lowest form 3. I didn't work with my peers. But that got me mad. And I realized the problem was mine. Well, I beat book, and by the next term, I was back with my peers. Because that disappointment gave me fuel to do more than I would have done. When you're comfortable, you get complacent. When you become complacent, you just slow down. And that happens in the world, and it happens in Christ. So many times when we get the blessings, we stop praying, we stop talking to God, and sometimes in order to get your attention, He will just pull back. Brothers and sisters, we have struggles. All of us will have struggles. Sometimes what you have as a struggle is, I wish I had, because I don't overcome that. But if it worries you, it's big enough to take it to God. And as we go to God with our struggles, let's have an expectation that He'll deal with it. Because here's the good news. He could deal with it. Here's the bad news. If you don't take it to Him, nobody else could deal with it. Verse 2 of Romans chapter 12 says this: do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And here is the kicker in that whole thing. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. If when we go to God with the expectation that He's going to help us, and what we intend for ourselves line up with God's perfect will, then that's a match made in heaven. It's a match that nobody could match. It's the best that could happen. But we have to allow our minds to be in tune with God's will. We can't go up with our own intentions. And when God lines it up with what He has intended for us, as He has intended for us, it doesn't fit like a hand in glove. It doesn't fit like part of a puzzle. If it doesn't fit, God ain't going to adjust. He ain't going to cut His part of the puzzle because you have to do the adjustment. And so it says, do not conform to the pattern of the world. In other words, don't shape like how the world will shape. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. In closing, please appreciate that God does not require us to be like robots. Robots can't function without a constant and continuous input from the person who is guiding the robot. Anytime you stop having your hand on that controller, robot stops. If you want to put the program in, it may not be a controller, it might be an app that uses a controller robot. If that app is not programmed properly, robot can work too. But God does not require us to be like robots. He, however, desires communion and fellowship with us so that there is congruence or alignment between His plans and ours. That guarantees that His will be done. Our desires are met in line with His will, and perfectionism does not rear its ugly head. It is His will that every need be supplied. You are important to Him. He wants you to survive. He's working on me. I'm a work in progress. He ain't done with me yet. How about you? Have a blessed one.